I still remember the moment like a shard of glass lodged in my chest, sharp, cold, impossible to ignore. We got married yesterday. The words slipped off his tongue like they were nothing, casual, polite, like announcing the weather. My son-in-law's easy smile cut through me, a cruel contrast to the hurricane building inside my chest. I felt my knees weaken for an instant, though I held them steady, clenching fists at my sides. The house, my house, the one I had filled with laughter, warmth, and the soft hum of ordinary life, suddenly seemed foreign, alien, as if it had been waiting all along to betray me. I should have shouted, should have demanded an explanation, but my voice was caught somewhere between disbelief and numbness. Every photograph on the wall stared back at me with silent accusation. Birthdays, vacations, candid smiles of a family I thought was mine to nurture, now twisted into evidence of my own blindness. I wandered through the living room, fingers brushing over the edges of the coffee table, the soft grooves worn into its wood over years of cups and small spills, searching for something to anchor me, something real, but the room offered nothing but shadows and echoes. The faint smell of my daughter's perfume, lingering from a past presence, struck me like a cruel reminder. She was gone emotionally and now legally, and the life I had built with her had been quietly stolen. My mind spun backwards, replaying conversations, minor disagreements, moments I thought trivial, trying to pinpoint the fracture I had missed. Every smile, every casual interaction, felt like a trap I had fallen into without realizing it. How had I been so blind? Could I have prevented this? Or was it inevitable, a slow erosion I had refused to acknowledge? I sank into the armchair, worn leather creaking under my weight, and stared at the floor. I could feel my chest tightening, the pulse in my temples racing like a warning drum. Rage and sorrow coiled in me, a snake ready to strike, but even that raw physical anger was tempered by the cold edge of calculation. If I was to move, if I was to confront what had been done, I had to think. I had to plan. I had to measure every step. The vulnerability, the heartbreak was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it had been joined now by a sharper, more precise emotion, determination. I recalled how she used to laugh in this room, the way her voice would carry across the walls, making the space feel alive. Now the silence was oppressive, thick, almost tangible, pressing against my eardrums. I could hear my own breathing, uneven, shallow, every inhalation a reminder of the tension strangling me. I ran a hand through my hair, tugging at it slightly, and tried to make sense of the scene that had just unfolded. My daughter's eyes had been careful, unreadable, and yet there was something in her expression that hinted at finality, an unspoken decision I had no power to alter, and yet I refused to accept that. Refusal became a mantra. I would not surrender what was mine. I would not be erased quietly. I moved to the window and looked out at the street, the early evening light falling in muted shades across the pavement. People passed by, laughing, talking, indifferent, and yet their ease made the betrayal burn hotter in my chest. Life went on outside my walls, indifferent to the storm inside me. Could I step out? Could I confront them now, here in the ordinary hum of the world, and demand answers, justice, or closure? The question clawed at me, unrelenting, because the truth was I had no idea how to start. My fingers curled around the edge of the windowsill, knuckles white. I could feel the weight of anticipation pressing down, heavier than any physical burden I had ever borne. I remembered every late-night conversation I had had with my daughter, every dinner shared as a family, every tiny moment where trust had been built brick by brick, and it all seemed to mock me now. Could all of that history, all of that love be swept aside in a single casual declaration? The thought made my stomach twist violently, a hollow ache that seemed to radiate through every limb. I wanted to scream, to tear the room apart with the force of my frustration and grief, but the walls contained me. They held me in place, forcing me to face the shattering of certainty head-on. I stepped back into the middle of the living room, the hardwood floor cold beneath my feet. My reflection in the polished surface was distorted, eyes wide, chest heaving, fists clenching and unclenching in rhythm with the chaos in my mind. How could this have happened? Where had I failed? And yet, alongside the hurt and disbelief, a cold calculation began to emerge, threading its way through the emotional storm. If they thought they could make this easy, that I would be subdued, that I would accept this betrayal without resistance, they had underestimated me. I pictured the conversations I would have, the questions I would ask, The subtle investigations I could initiate, every interaction, every observation could be a clue, a chance to understand the truth behind the quiet audacity of their actions. The anger that had initially threatened to consume me now became a tool, sharp and precise, guiding my thoughts toward what needed to be done next. I did not yet know the form it would take, but I knew I could not remain passive. The house was mine still in every tangible sense, and even if the life I had imagined with my daughter was gone, my presence could not be erased without deliberate effort. I sank onto the sofa, the fabric rough beneath my palms, and let my gaze drift over the photographs that had once brought comfort. Faces frozen in joy now felt accusatory, reminders of a life I could not reclaim but could strategically navigate. My mind flipped through the past with surgical precision. Birthdays overlooked, anniversaries celebrated, late-night talks, the small gestures of care that defined my role as a father and a presence in this household. Could those moments serve as evidence of what had been? A leverage to reclaim authority and respect? The thought sparked something dangerously close to hope, or at least the faintest flicker of control in a world suddenly chaotic. The air in the room felt thick,
as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what I would do next.
The echoes of the phrase, "We got married yesterday," bounced through the space, a relentless reminder that nothing would ever be the same. And yet in that echo I began to hear a second sound, the quiet rhythm of my own heartbeat, the steady drum of resilience, the whisper of survival. I realized then that the first step toward responding was simply to exist in that moment, fully aware, fully present, and unwilling to surrender. I moved toward the hallway, the light fading around the edges, casting long, thin shadows across the floor. Could I confront them tonight? Would it even change anything? The questions collided, and I felt a shiver of both fear and anticipation run down my spine. I reached the threshold of the doorway and paused, breath caught in my chest. Outside, the quiet, ordinary hum of life waited. Neighbors, cars, the soft shuffle of feet on the pavement. But inside, the storm raged. And in that storm, I began to plot, to consider, to sharpen the edges of my emotional and strategic response. I stood there alone, the living room stretching silent around me, and let the moment settle. I was suspended between disbelief and fury, heartbreak and nascent resolve. Each memory of the past 25 years pressed against me, demanding recognition, demanding response. And yet alongside the ache, I felt the first tremor of empowerment, a fragile understanding that although I had been blindsided, I was not defeated. Not yet. Not while breath still filled my lungs and thought still sparked in my mind. Then, as if the universe understood the precarious balance of my emotions, my phone buzzed lightly on the counter, a trivial sound. Ordinary in itself, but in that silence it felt like an omen. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. Was it another message? A clarification? A new wave of betrayal waiting to land? I hesitated, finger hovering above the screen, knowing that picking it up could shift the trajectory of my night, of my thoughts, perhaps even of my life. I inhaled slowly, letting the tension settle just enough to steady myself. And there it was. The quiet, heavy understanding that nothing about this evening, or any evening moving forward, would ever be simple again. The storm inside me had only begun, and the echoes of "We got married yesterday" were poised to chase me through every room, every memory, every calculated thought. The living room held its silence, thick, oppressive, almost conspiratorial, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. I knew then that this was just the beginning, of questions, of discoveries, of confrontations, of reckoning. And with that, I realized the truth that would guide me in the days to come. I was standing at the edge of certainty's collapse, and the fall, whether painful or liberating, was inevitable. The air pressed close. My hands twitched. I stared at the empty hallway, the fading light casting shadows that whispered of secrets yet to reveal themselves. The weight of the night pressed down, and I understood deep in my bones that the next word, the next glance, the next move could unravel everything, or begin the first thread of reclamation. The room waited, and so did I. I woke to silence that felt thicker than any night I had ever known, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the laughter and warmth of years and refused to return it. My chest felt hollow, my arms heavy, and the emptiness of the bed beside me was a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. The sun filtered weakly through the curtains, casting pale rectangles across the floor. But even that light felt alien. unwelcoming. I sat there, fingers clenching the sheets, and let my thoughts spiral. She had gone. My daughter's voice, usually so vibrant and familiar, was now distant, polite, measured, carefully controlled, unreadable. Every conversation felt like walking on thin ice. Every glance a challenge I didn't know how to meet. The house that once breathed life and warmth now felt like a tomb I couldn't escape. I moved through the living room slowly, tracing my hand over the arm of the sofa, over the coffee table, the surfaces holding traces of yesterday's normality that now mocked me. Cups, photo frames, little mementos. Each one whispered the same thing. You were blind, you were too late. You didn't notice the cracks forming under your feet. My mind raced back to the day I first heard the words, "We got married yesterday." The casualness of the declaration, the calmness in my son-in-law's eyes haunted me. How could someone I had trusted, someone I had nurtured and loved for decades, be so utterly detached from the devastation left in their wake? My thoughts twisted into guilt and self-recrimination. Had I been too busy? Too distracted by work, by the routines of life? Or had this been happening quietly, stealthily, right under my nose? I found myself wandering from room to room, almost on autopilot, each step heavy, each turn bringing a new memory that stung like a fresh cut. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, untouched since she left. The mug I had used for years sitting on the counter like a relic of a life I no longer inhabited. The hallway to her bedroom felt oppressive, each footstep echoing like a drumbeat of absence. I reached for the doorknob, stopped, and let my hand hover. Part of me wanted to look, to see if maybe this nightmare was reversible, if maybe she had just vanished temporarily and would return with warmth and smiles. But I knew, somewhere deep inside, that the room would be as empty as the rest of the house, and that knowledge hit me harder than any confrontation could. I sank into the chair by the window, watching the street outside, the world moving on without me. People laughed, cars honked, footsteps echoed, indifferent to the storm that had swallowed my existence whole. I felt like an outsider, invisible and betrayed, caught in a limbo between grief and the burning need for answers. How could life continue when mine had been shattered so completely? Each unanswered text, each failed call added weight to the silence. The digital emptiness mirrored the physical emptiness of the rooms. And with every failed attempt at communication, the anger inside me began to sharpen, curdling into something cold, something strategic. I realized that to survive, to reclaim even a fraction of control, I had to act. Not with brute force or confrontation, not yet, but subtly. Observation, inquiry, the gathering of details, that would be my first step. Every question I asked, every passing remark, could serve as a breadcrumb back to the truth. I started small casual questions to neighbors, tentative comments to family friends, subtle attempts to gauge reactions, to detect inconsistencies, to uncover the layer of secrecy behind the wedding I had been blindsided by. Each response, each twitch of an eye or hesitation in a voice, felt like a small revelation, a whisper of hidden truths, and my pulse quickened with both dread and anticipation. In the evenings, I would pace through the living room, the shadows stretching long across the floor as the sun dipped behind distant buildings. The quiet was both suffocating and clarifying. I replayed old conversations in my mind, dissecting every word, every tone, trying to discern a pattern, trying to make sense of the betrayal. The more I analyzed, the more I felt both rage and fascination, a twisted dance between hurt and the growing desire to uncover the secrets they had tried to keep from me. Could I confront them now? Should I wait until I had more information? The questions gnawed at me, refusing to settle. I found myself revisiting the photo albums, flipping pages slowly as if each photograph could speak, as if the smiles frozen in time could confess the hidden shifts, the silent betrayals. Birthdays, dinners, holidays, small candid moments, had they all been staged, quietly rewritten without my knowledge? My heart pounded, chest tight, as the realization that some of the foundation I thought solid might have been eroding all along began to take hold. I had been a father, a protector, a silent observer of their lives. But now I wondered if my passivity had enabled the very act that broke me. One evening, I noticed something odd, a subtle clue in the patterns of her messages, an inconsistency in the casual phrasing, the absence of details that should have been present. My stomach twisted as I read the lines over and over, a whisper of something secret, a crack in the carefully constructed calm. My mind raced, trying to connect dots, trying to anticipate what might lie behind it. Could this be the thread that unravels the full tapestry of betrayal? Or was I seeing patterns where none existed, letting paranoia feed my grief? I didn't know, and the uncertainty both thrilled and terrified me. The days blurred into a rhythm of quiet observation and restless pacing. I noticed the slight avoidance in my daughter's eyes, the forced politeness in her tone when she spoke, the way she lingered in rooms just long enough to signal presence without intimacy. My internal monologue churned relentlessly, alternating between grief, rage, and the cold calculation that was beginning to take shape. I had to know, had to see the truth, had to gather the pieces before I could decide how to respond. Each fleeting hint, each subtle clue became a potential lever, a point of entry into the hidden story they were trying to hide from me. I started leaving small tests, casual questions dropped into conversation, gauging responses, watching for the slightest tremor, the faintest flicker of discomfort or hesitation. The tension in the house thickened as I sharpened my senses, listening to the gaps, to the pauses, to the unsaid. Nights became long and restless, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the city beyond my walls. My reflection in the window stared back at me, eyes wide, jaw tight, mind a storm of suspicion, hurt, and strategy. I wondered if they knew I was beginning to see through the veil. And if so, how long before the deception would crumble? And then, finally, a small whispered discovery, a clue so slight I almost dismissed it. A detail in a conversation, an overlooked document, a hesitation in her eyes that spoke volumes in silence. My pulse quickened, the room seeming to hold its breath with me. The betrayal I had felt, the absence I had endured, the long, cold stretch of days all funneled into this moment. The weight of revelation pressed down on me, thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. I could feel the edges of the truth, delicate yet undeniable, waiting for me to grasp it fully. I stepped back from the window, heart hammering, palms slick with sweat, and stared at the floor. Could this single thread unravel the whole tapestry? Could I finally understand what had been done behind my back, and if I could, what would I do next? The questions loomed large, but there was no turning back now. The silence of the house, once suffocating, had transformed into an accomplice, carrying the promise of answers yet to be fully revealed. The air felt heavier, the shadows longer, the quiet almost conspiratorial, as if the house itself was waiting for me to act. And I understood, deep in my bones, that the next discovery, the next movement, would set the stage for everything to come. The storm was gathering, and I was at its center, poised between heartbreak and revelation, between vulnerability and the first steps of calculated action. I swallowed hard, breath-catching, and turned toward the hallway, every nerve alive, every sense alert. The whispered clue echoed in my mind, a fragile beacon in the darkness of my grief. The house held its secrets tightly, but I was beginning to pry at them carefully, deliberately, and the tension coiled around me like a living thing. I could feel the first tremors of understanding, and with them, the uncomfortable thrill of what was to come. The living room was still, yet charged, every object a reminder, every shadow a potential signpost. My gaze fell on the clock, each tick a countdown, each second stretching into eternity. I knew that tonight or tomorrow, or perhaps even in the smallest, most unguarded moment, another piece of the puzzle would fall into place. And when it did, the quiet betrayal that had haunted me would begin to reveal its full shape. I took a deep breath, letting it fill my lungs and settle the tension just enough to steady my thoughts. The silence, oppressive and unyielding, suddenly felt like a canvas ready for the first brushstroke of clarity. And as I leaned against the doorway, feeling the cool wood under my fingers, I understood with a cold certainty. I was standing at the precipice of revelation, and the truth, whatever it held, was just beyond the next step. The house waited. The city hummed outside, and I waited with it, heart pounding, senses sharpened, poised on the fragile edge between heartbreak and discovery. I remember the moment I stepped into the lawyer's office, the sterile smell of paper and leather assaulting my senses. The walls were too white, the fluorescent lights too harsh, as if the room itself demanded I confront the cold, unyielding truth. I gripped the chair arms, knuckles whitening, heart hammering, trying to steady my breath. This wasn't just paperwork. This was the battlefield where everything I had built, everything I thought I was now under siege. And I was walking in alone. The lawyer, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, smiled professionally, not warmly, and slid the first folder toward me. Divorce papers. My eyes scanned the printed lines, each one cutting deeper than any knife could. Custody arrangements, property settlements, clauses I barely understood yet felt designed to strip me of more than just material possessions. My mind flared with disbelief, rage, and sorrow all at once. How had it come to this? How had the family I nurtured, the home I loved, the life I built with my hands and heart been reduced to ink on a page, cold and indifferent? I traced the edges of the papers with trembling fingers, my chest tight. Memories bubbled up unbidden, her laughter echoing in the kitchen, our daughter's small hands reaching for mine, the quiet nights when we shared dreams and secrets. And yet here I was, staring at a series of legal threats disguised as official documents. I wanted to scream, to tear the papers to shreds, to demand that this wasn't real, that the world had made a mistake. But the lawyer sat calmly, impassive, and I realized that rage alone wouldn't save me. It would be calculation, observation, and the careful weaving of leverage that could bring me back from this precipice. Each clause became a weapon in my mind. Each stipulation, a potential angle for reclaiming some control. I studied every sentence, every number, looking for discrepancies, ambiguities, oversights. Was there a loophole here? A misstep there? A forgotten procedural detail that could shift the power back into my hands? The legalese blurred together, but my instincts were sharp. The emotional storm inside me, grief, fury, disbelief, melded with cold strategic thought. I was learning that battle was no longer about pleading, about confrontation. It was about precision, patience, and understanding the game they thought I didn't know how to play. I pictured her face, my daughter's, calm and composed yet unreadable, and felt a pang of guilt mixed with the fire of determination. I couldn't let her or anyone else think that I would go quietly. This wasn't just about money or custody. This was about my identity, my legacy, my place in the world I had built. I had fought for years to create a family, and now I was being stripped of it. But I wouldn't surrender. I refused to let this betrayal define me. The lawyer began walking me through the documents. His voice was neutral, almost clinical, but I barely heard him. I was lost in calculations, replaying every interaction, every subtle cue, trying to link the past to the present. Could I have missed something before? Could I find a thread, a detail they overlooked that would give me leverage? Every legal meeting became a test of observation, every signature a potential opportunity. I learned to read hesitation, to detect discomfort, to sense the invisible currents beneath the professional politeness. Hours passed, each minute stretching into a tension-laden eternity. I held the papers close, memorizing details, imagining counter-arguments, mentally rehearsing questions that might reveal secrets hidden in plain sight. And then, almost imperceptibly, I noticed something, a discrepancy in one clause, a minor misstatement that on its own seemed trivial, but in the right hands, in the right context, could unravel their carefully constructed advantage. My pulse quickened. Could this be it? Could this tiny flaw, barely noticeable to anyone else, be the key to shifting the balance back toward me? I leaned back in the chair, trying to steady my breathing, imagining the possibilities. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights. They all condensed into a singular purpose, uncovering every hidden angle, exploiting every oversight, and reclaiming what had been quietly taken from me. Every memory of laughter, of shared holidays, of intimate moments became fuel for the cold fire of strategy. I would not be defeated quietly, not by them. Not by circumstance. Later, in the solitude of my car parked outside the office, I revisited the folder again. The city moved around me, oblivious to the war that raged within my chest. Children played in the park across the street. Lovers held hands, strangers passed without notice. Life continued outside my storm of grief and rage, indifferent to my personal collapse. But I felt a strange clarity begin to settle among the chaos inside me. Observation, patience, timing, these would be my weapons. Not anger alone, not impulsive confrontation, but precise, deliberate action. I replayed conversations, replayed her smiles, her subtle evasions, the way she had avoided eye contact in moments that should have been ordinary. I saw patterns now that I hadn't before, threads of secrecy woven into the fabric of our family life. And as the sun dipped behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the car, I realized I had already begun to reclaim control, piece by piece, clue by clue. Each minor revelation, each tiny oversight I discovered was a brick in the bridge back to my agency, my dignity, my sense of belonging. The evening stretched, and I couldn't sleep. My mind churned over strategies and contingencies. Should I confront them directly? Or should I gather more evidence first, watch, wait, and strike only when the timing was indisputably mine? I reviewed every legal term, every clause, imagining hypothetical scenarios, predicting reactions, testing limits in my head. The emotional intensity coexisted with methodical calculation. I realized that the emotional storm, grief, rage, betrayal, was not an enemy but a fuel source for the cold precision I would need. Then a small slip, a phone call I overheard, a careless comment in the office, hinted at mismanagement, at a gap in their careful planning. My chest tightened as I considered the implications. Could this be the leverage I needed? Could a single overlooked detail shift everything in my favor? The thrill of possibility surged, mixing with lingering hurt, making my pulse race. I had been blindsided, yes, but now I had the chance to turn the game. And in that moment I felt both exhilarated and wary, knowing how fragile the advantage was, how quickly it could slip if I misstepped. I sat alone in the darkened living room later that night. The papers spread around me like a battlefield, each document a weapon, each signature a potential pivot, each paragraph a clue. I could feel the first tendrils of control returning, subtle yet undeniable as I began to map the path forward. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the sense of loss, it was still there, raw and vivid, but it had been joined now by something else. Strategy, purpose, possibility. And then, among the countless pages, my eyes fell on one line, a minor notation that almost seemed accidental, a detail so easily overlooked that it had been dismissed as irrelevant. But my gut screamed otherwise. My pulse surged, adrenaline and hope mingling with fury and grief. This could be the leverage I had been waiting for, the key that would allow me to regain some measure of control, some semblance of balance in the chaos that had consumed my life. I pressed the folder against my chest, heart pounding, mind racing with the implications. The night outside was silent, the city sleeping, unaware of the storm of calculation and emotion unfolding within these walls. I felt the first tremor of a plan forming, fragile yet potent, and the tension coiled in my chest like a living thing. Every sleepless night, every pang of betrayal, every memory of laughter now became fuel for what I would do next. I knew the coming days would demand every ounce of vigilance and cunning I could muster. The emotional intensity of grief and rage would have to be balanced with the careful, deliberate execution of strategy. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the raw pain and the simmering anger, a spark of hope flickered. Perhaps, just perhaps, I could turn the tide. Perhaps the betrayal that had struck so violently could be redirected into leverage, into the reclamation of not just property, not just custody, but of dignity, identity, and control. The papers sat before me like a map of minefields, every line a potential trap or opportunity. I felt my mind sharpening, focus tightening, senses alert. The betrayal was still fresh, still raw, but the path forward was beginning to reveal itself. A small revelation, a slip, a minor error. This was my foothold, my chance to act, and I could feel the tension building to a point where nothing could remain hidden for long. I rose, clutching the folder, every muscle tense, every nerve alive. The night outside seemed to thrum with possibility and threat, the city indifferent to the emotional war unfolding within its midst. I knew that tomorrow, or perhaps even tonight, I would take the next step. And when I did, the consequences would ripple outward, unseen but undeniable. The game was shifting, and I would not be caught unprepared. I placed the folder carefully on the table, leaning close to it, eyes scanning every word once more. The revelation, tiny and almost innocuous, promised leverage, a sliver of control in a world that had seemed to conspire against me. I felt a mixture of dread and exhilaration, knowing that the next move would define the rest of my life. Every heartbeat seemed amplified in the quiet room. I could feel the storm gathering, the tension coiling, and I knew that the next discovery, the next confrontation, would change everything. The night stretched on, and I sat there tense, aware, alert, waiting for the next piece to fall into place. The betrayal was still a raw wound, but the glimmer of leverage was a lifeline, and as I leaned back, eyes fixed on the folder, I realized with a mixture of fear and anticipation, the battle was only beginning. The first time I stepped outside after weeks of isolation, the air hit me like a shock, crisp and unexpected. The city hummed with life, indifferent to my collapse, indifferent to the ruin that had consumed me. I inhaled deeply, tasting the faint scent of exhaust, autumn leaves, and something fleetingly familiar that reminded me of mornings before everything fell apart. I could feel my pulse quicken, not from panic this time, but from a strange mix of anticipation and fear. Perhaps this was the beginning. Perhaps this was the first step toward reclaiming what had been taken. I gripped my old camera as if it were a talisman, a link to a version of myself that hadn't been hollowed out by betrayal. The lens felt cool under my fingers, and as I raised it to my eye, the world transformed. People walked by, oblivious to my gaze, children chasing pigeons, an elderly man feeding scraps of bread to a stray cat. Every detail, every gesture seemed to vibrate with meaning. I captured the moments carefully, quietly, as if documenting not just the world around me, but the fragments of myself I was trying to find again. Each click of the shutter was a heartbeat, a declaration. I still existed. I still mattered. I wandered through the familiar streets, but they felt strange, alien, and yet full of opportunity. Every corner, every passing stranger became a mirror reflecting how far I had fallen and how far I might rise. I replayed the conversations in my head, every smirk, every glint in my daughter's eyes, every whispered secret from the shadows of my former home. The memory gnawed at me, how casually they had dismantled my place in our family, my role in the life I had devoted myself to. But that gnawing also sparked resolve. If I could analyze, observe, calculate, then perhaps I could regain a foothold in a world that had seemed to erase me overnight. The park offered a moment of stillness. I sat on a bench, letting sunlight filter through the amber leaves, and examined the photographs I had taken. Each image was a small victory, a piece of control reclaimed. But the quiet was deceptive. Every serene moment carried its own tension. I felt the lingering attachment to what I had lost. The warmth of shared laughter, the soft curve of my daughter's smile, the presence of a family that no longer saw me as central to its existence. And yet, mingled with that attachment, there was tentative hope, fragile but insistent, a whisper that maybe life could be rebuilt on my terms. I explored forgotten streets, revisited old cafes, and spoke briefly to neighbors I had barely noticed before. Each encounter became a subtle probe, a measure of how the world now perceived me, how much authority I had lost, and how I might begin to reclaim it. A fleeting glance here, a comment there, seemed to hint at possibilities I had not considered. The city was alive, complex, and full of unspoken stories, and I intended to map them all, to understand them, to find leverage wherever it might exist. Back home, I arranged the photographs in a careful sequence, a visual diary of observation and reflection. I pored over every detail, scrutinizing shadows, the angle of the sun, expressions frozen in time. Each frame told a story. Each story hinted at patterns, opportunities, missteps, and hidden threads. The past weighed heavily on me, but the present offered tools, clues, and paths forward I had ignored while drowning in grief. My hands trembled slightly as I traced the edges of the photographs, a shiver of fear mingling with anticipation. Could I rebuild? Could I reclaim even a fragment of what had been stolen? Then came the first unexpected encounter. I was photographing a street musician, the melancholic strains of a violin cutting through the chatter of pedestrians, when a familiar voice called my name. I turned sharply. My daughter stood there, casual, polite, and yet unreadable. My heart lurched, caught between longing and dread. Did she sense my observation? My quiet analysis of her life, or was this an innocent crossing of paths? The moment stretched unbearably, every second a delicate balance of fear and calculation. I offered a polite nod, measured and controlled, but inside my mind raced. Was this encounter coincidence, or was there something more, a subtle challenge, a test? I continued my walk, and the city revealed more hints of the world I thought I knew. Cafes where whispered conversations hinted at secrets, small gestures from passers-by that seemed inconsequential, yet suggested layers of life I had been blind to. I observed meticulously, cataloging, mapping, and imagining the paths I might navigate to reclaim authority. My camera became a bridge between memory and strategy, between grief and calculated action. Each shutter click was a heartbeat, a decision, a silent vow that I would not fade into obscurity. One afternoon, as I wandered near the edge of a familiar park, I noticed a shadow moving with unusual precision, someone following my path without acknowledgement, almost as if testing the waters. My pulse surged. Was this mere coincidence or a sign that my investigations had not gone unnoticed? I tightened my grip on the camera, the cold metal grounding me, reminding me that observation was power. I would not be blindsided again. Every step forward required caution, awareness, and deliberate action. The air seemed heavier, charged with possibilities and threat alike. The days blurred as I balanced quiet observation with strategic thought. I revisited old friendships, rekindling connections long dormant, each interaction a test, each conversation a probe for insight. I began to see the contours of opportunity, places where influence could be reasserted, relationships leveraged, authority regained. Even mundane interactions carried significance. A stray comment from a neighbor, a fleeting glance from a shopkeeper, a fragment of overheard conversation, all pieces of a larger puzzle that might allow me to reclaim control. Late one evening, I walked past the theater district, and the smell of popcorn and fading neon reminded me of earlier times, days when laughter had been easy, when the family felt whole. Nostalgia twisted painfully in my chest, but beneath it, a spark of determination glimmered. I realized that the same city that had taken so much from me now offered avenues for reinvention, for reclamation. Every street, every corner, every unnoticed gesture was a clue, a potential leverage point in the subtle warfare of survival and self-assertion. Returning home, I placed the camera on the shelf, photographs laid out like a strategist's map. Shadows from the street lamps outside stretched across the walls, long, uncertain, hinting at threats unseen. I felt both vulnerability and empowerment, fear and courage, loss and emerging self-assertion intertwining in a tense equilibrium. I replayed the small clues of the day, the subtle hesitations, the tiny gestures of secrecy or omission, and considered how I might turn them into advantage. Each observation deepened my resolve, and then as I settled into the quiet of my apartment, the phone rang. I froze. The screen was blank, but the vibration against the table was enough to send a shiver down my spine. Was this a call from the past? A thread pulled by someone aware of my growing vigilance? Or an opportunity disguised as chance? A subtle opening in a world that had felt so controlled by others. My fingers hovered, hesitant, heart pounding, mind racing through possibilities. This was the moment where observation met action, where strategy collided with risk. The shadows outside seemed to lean closer, the night itself holding its breath. I stared at the phone, every nerve alert, knowing that the next step I took could either solidify my resurgence or undo everything I had begun to reclaim. The path forward glimmered faintly, a thin thread through darkness illuminated by the knowledge that I had survived betrayal, grief, and isolation. But the journey was far from over. The city outside whispered possibilities and dangers alike, and I felt the tension coil in my chest, ready to snap into decisive motion. And as I reached slowly, deliberately, toward the vibrating phone, a quiet smile touched my lips. Not of relief, not of joy, but of recognition. The storm was still out there, yes, but now I was standing ready. I was alert. I was alive, and I would not be caught unprepared. I remember the moment I stepped out onto the quiet street, the sun just beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised oranges and purples. It was a color I had always loved but never noticed until now, until everything had been stripped bare and the silence had room to breathe. I paused, feeling the cool breeze on my face, listening to the distant hum of traffic, the laughter of children fading into evening. And in that silence, I realized something vital. I could no longer live tethered to the past, to the betrayals, to the echoes of what was stolen from me. It was time to choose, truly choose, how I would step into whatever came next. The phone on my table vibrated, a faint, insistent reminder of connections I had ignored, conversations I had avoided. My thumb hovered, hesitating, heart beating against my ribs like a frantic drum. Each second stretched unbearably, the weight of decision pressing on me. Could I pick it up and revisit the ghost of what was lost, risking the familiar sting of rejection and pain? Or would I let it ring, a signal that my attention belonged only to myself now, to the life I would forge alone? I exhaled slowly, tasting the tension in the air, the faint scent of rain on asphalt drifting from the street outside. This was a moment of quiet power. I realized I didn't need approval, validation, or reconciliation from anyone. Not her, not my daughter, not even the world that had seemed so indifferent to my suffering. I wandered through the familiar streets of my neighborhood, each shadow and street lamp casting long, distorted shapes across the pavement. Memories flickered unbidden. The laughter at dinner tables, the warmth of shared holidays, the subtle betrayals that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. I felt the familiar pang of loss, a sharp twist of grief that made my chest ache, but I also felt something else. The slow, rising pulse of agency. I could decide now, not react, not plead, not seethe. I could choose. And in that choice lay freedom. The park beckoned, its benches empty except for a few stragglers, the fading sunlight turning the leaves to molten gold. I sat on one of the benches, camera resting in my lap, hands tense, eyes scanning everything around me. The world felt vast, alive, and yet curiously indifferent to my turmoil. It was liberating in a strange way, the realization that life moves forward whether I am ready or not, whether I cling or let go. I traced the edges of the photographs I had taken over the past weeks, each frame a testament to observation, to awareness, to survival. Every image was a marker of reclamation, a small victory that no one else could take from me. I replayed every conversation, every subtle glance, every unspoken signal that had led me to this moment. Betrayal had carved deep furrows in my mind, but I refused to let it define the horizon of my life. I had learned to see, to measure, to calculate, not for vengeance alone, but for clarity, for understanding. There was a delicate balance in acknowledging pain while refusing its dominion. I had rehearsed countless scenarios, imagined confrontations, plotted silent strategies, but now, as the golden light washed over my hands and the rustling leaves whispered overhead, I felt the first real sense of calm I had known since the upheaval began. The phone buzzed again, sharper this time, breaking the fragile quiet. I stared at it, the choice crystallizing. I could answer and risk being drawn into old patterns, into the gravitational pull of what I had lost. Or I could ignore it, asserting my independence, my agency, allowing the world to acknowledge that I was no longer at the mercy of others' decisions. My fingers brushed the smooth surface, trembling slightly, but my mind was deliberate, precise. I would not be manipulated by expectation or obligation. My life, my decisions were mine alone. As the sun sank lower, the sky deepening into violet, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The months of shock, despair, and isolation had been merciless teachers. They had stripped away complacency, exposed weaknesses, and yet revealed strengths I had never recognized. The legal battles, the whispered suspicions, the clandestine observations, they were no longer chains but stepping stones. Every misstep by others had been a lesson in vigilance, every silence an invitation to introspection. And through it all I had remained, reshaped but resolute. I thought of my daughter, of the family whose cohesion had fractured so violently, and felt the familiar tug of longing. But beneath it I also felt clarity. Attachment did not require surrender. Love did not necessitate submission. I could honor what had been without sacrificing the self I was reclaiming. The memory of their secret wedding, the quiet mockery of unspoken betrayal, could remain in the past where it belonged, acknowledged but not allowed to dictate my path forward. Night fell slowly, the city lights flickering on like distant constellations, mirroring the scattered pieces of my life. I walked home, each step deliberate, every shadow a reminder of endurance. The apartment was quiet, the rooms holding the echo of absence, yet within me stirred a new rhythm, a pulse of quiet purpose. I moved through the spaces I had once shared, touching the edges of furniture, brushing the walls lightly, acknowledging memory without surrendering to it. The weight of betrayal no longer felt like a prison but a threshold. Pain had refined my perception, sharpened my instincts, illuminated paths previously unseen. I paused at the window, looking out over the city, the faint buzz of life below blending with the soft rustle of leaves outside. I could feel the culmination of every sleepless night, every anguished observation, every surge of calculated thought crystallizing into a singular decision. I would not let bitterness consume me. I would not allow past grief to dictate future joy. I would move forward, choosing engagement or disengagement as circumstance demanded, choosing peace, choosing agency, choosing me. The phone lay on the table, vibrating for the final time. I let it ring, its hum fading into the silence I had carved for myself. A sense of profound relief mingled with lingering tension. I had chosen, not out of surrender, not out of spite, but out of self-assertion. The past remained, intact, irreversible, but it no longer held dominion. I exhaled slowly, the tension easing from my shoulders, the bruised light of the sunset warming my face. I was standing on the threshold of a new beginning, poised between endings and possibilities, aware that the journey ahead would still be uncertain, fraught, and testing, but mine to navigate. And just as the last ray of sun disappeared behind the skyline, a quiet knock at the door drew my attention. My pulse quickened, curiosity and caution intertwining. Who or what waited on the other side? Another chance, another complication, another truth poised to tip the balance? I rose slowly, aware that the choices I had made up to this point had led me here, but that the next step could change everything again. Hand hovering over the doorknob, I paused, breath catching, the city outside dark and silent, my heart brimming with resolve and uncertainty. The door beckoned, and with it, the final test of everything I had learned, everything I had endured, and everything I was ready to claim. The stage is set. Every decision, every observation, every reclaimed piece of self has led to this threshold.